Nimzo-Indian defense happens when white plays d4, black answers with knight f6, d4, e6, knight to c3, and bishop to b4. This opening is incredibly solid for black and maybe the best one against d4 to equalize the position. So the point is, when we play bishop b4, we are basically ready to give up this bishop and exchange it, maybe destroy white's pawn structure, or just gain some time to develop our pieces quickly and then be very solid in the center, or maybe even attack from this side, making this light square's bishop very active. There are of course a bunch of different opportunities for white. First of all, they might attack the bishop immediately, a3, asking a question, and of course we never go back. We can never go to a5 because we just lose the bishop. So the point is of course to take on c3 and just to say, well, okay, you have two bishops now, but you haven't developed any pieces and your pawn structure is compromised, so I'm gonna attack it immediately with the move c5, put some pressure, continue my development. Of course you can never take it because those triple pawns are just horrible, and yeah, black is gonna be able to pick it up without any problems and then be better in this position. So e3 and then knight c6, just normally developing the pieces and saying that it's so difficult for you to use those bishops. I mean, this bishop on c1 is so passive here. How are you gonna use it? The only chance is to play e4, but I'm gonna use that time. I'm gonna develop all of my pieces. For example, here make castles and be ahead in terms of the development, and then I'm gonna have enough compensation for those two bishops. So for example, b6 here, and it's possible for white to play e4 and open up the bishop. I mean, otherwise, why would you need two bishops advantage if you are not opening up the position? But here black has an idea to just go back to avoid any attacks, and after castles play bishop to a6, because the point is to put some pressure on those weak pawns in the white's camp. Now white can play f4. That is of course a very active move here, a lot of pawns in the center, but black might block it with a move f5, saying that, well, this bishop is once again so passive, and in general the position is pretty closed, so you can't make use of the pair of bishops. Remember, you can only use your two bishops advantage if you manage to open up the position. Here you might take on f5 to make this pawn more vulnerable, you might take on c5, but still you have those weak pawns. Still black is very solid here, d6, everything is protected, and yeah, you're gonna struggle to get something here as white. And black, of course, has some targets, has a very solid setup, and I mean, no problems with the development. So that is basically the idea when you play the move bishop to b4. Let's take a look at other variations. The main move for white is here e3, and it has multiple ideas. You can continue with knight e2, and I pretty much like this setup because one knight defends another one, and then you play a3 and takes, and you're not destroying your pawn structure, so you're taken back with a knight. But the problem is then black can castle, and after knight e2 just play d5, and after a3 saying, well, you have prepared for this bishop takes c3 move, so I'm gonna just step back bishop e7. You might say, well, now I have won the tempo because the bishop went to b4 and went back. But the drawback is that this knight is kind of misplaced here, because it should really be on f3, it would have been more active there, not blocking the bishop, and now it's on e2, and you still need to spend another tempo to play, let's say, knight f4, and then develop the bishop, and still black is incredibly solid here, and there is even no two bishops advantage here. So something like rook e8, castles, knight b to d7, a very solid approach, and once again, the point is that it's so easy to equalize the position as black, and that is basically the main goal of the opening, and then you can fight for the advantage. Of course, here there are other options, not playing knight e2 immediately, or not playing it at all, just playing bishop d3, saying if you want you can take, I don't mind, otherwise I'm gonna just develop all of my pieces. And black normally doesn't take this knight without a good reason, like a3, if you're gonna attack me, if you're gonna spend a dedicated tempo to ask me this question, then I'm gonna exchange the bishop. But otherwise it stands good here, just pinning the knight, and maybe later on, if there is no necessity to take the knight, it can also go somewhere back like d6 or e7. So d5 is a very normal move here, just fighting for the center, not allowing white to play e4, because, well, you can never be too passive. You can never allow your opponent to just control everything. You always have to have some counter threats, some counterplay to attack your opponent's center. Here knight f3 is the main move, and now c5, so black is continuing to put some pressure on white's center. castles, and knight c6. So here white can play a3, attacking this bishop, and once again we don't really want to go back, although that's also possible, but the main idea is to take on c3 and say, okay, you have a pair of bishops, but look at your bishop on c1, it's so passive, you can't do anything with it, and I can just continue my development, queen c7, and then what usually happens, black takes on c4 and then play e5, trying to fight for the center, opening up this bishop, or if you take on d5, then the bishop is going to be opened by itself and can be developed, but this bishop is still very passive there on c1. You might say, well, I'm going to play queen to c2, I'm going to develop my queen, defend this knight on c3 with a queen, and then I'm going to play a3 and take it with a queen. That's completely playable. For example, castles, a3, bishop takes, and queen takes. And basically your pawn structure is still very good, and you have now a pair of bishops, but black has already made the castles, black has already developed the knight and could develop the bishop here to the long diagonal and just be ahead in terms of the development. For example, bishop to g5, bishop to b7. Now f3 is pretty popular because if you manage to play e4, that would be great. You really control the whole center and yeah, there is nothing to worry about. But whenever white plays f3, black plays d5, stopping this idea. Or, of course, you can also attack c5 and attack the d4 pawn. The point is you always have to put some pressure on the center, because now if you play e4, takes, knight c6 with a tempo, and of course black has a lot of initiative here and is basically better. And of course d5 is the main line here, just physically stopping the move e4, so white has to play e3 and develop rather slowly. So knight b to d7, c takes d, e takes d, bishop to d3, still trying to play e4 one day, but the rook is very good here, stopping this idea. Knight goes to e2, h6, bishop h4, and c5. So once again, black is putting a lot of pressure on white's position. The rook is coming to c8, and we are always trying to stop white's expansion in the center. Of course, there are more variations for white. You can play f3 immediately, but once again, there is always d5 as a response, not allowing to play e4, and then it's still kind of the same line. Knight can go to f3, just ignoring this bishop altogether, but it's not a problem. Black can just continue with b6 or castles, and yeah, the same plan always works. Bishop b4 is a very interesting setup. Here the Nimzo-Indian Defense, a very solid opening for black, trying to just make sure that we are solid, that we are very fast in terms of the development. We make castles very early on, and then we are attacking in the center and be as active as possible. Yes, we give up the two bishops advantage, but it's so difficult to use it for white in most of the variation. Let me know in the comments what you think about this opening, whether you like it, whether you play it. I mean, a lot of top players are playing it, including Magnus, other top grandmasters, and yeah, it's very solid. It's so difficult as white to fight for an advantage here. Now, what usually happens in chess is a so-called transposition, when one opening goes into another one and vice versa. And Nimzo-Indian can easily transpose into the Queen's Gambit and vice versa. Now, in this video, I make a review of the Queen's Gambit explaining the main ideas, so definitely take a look.